Welcome, everyone. My name is RJ Bruley. I am the author of the book Soul Siege. This is book one, Excursion. I'm actually currently working on book two as we speak. I'm about halfway into it, and I have an estimated release date of spring of 2022. That is still on pace. I'm hoping to meet that goal, and I'm still on target as of right now. Obviously, things can happen. It's the holiday season. As you can see, I'm in my ugly Christmas sweater. I hope you guys enjoy that. But in the meantime, let's focus on book one. Now, today's video, I'm going to be reading the prologue to you guys, and I will say this, I am not a voice talent or a voice actor, so bear with me. I did my best to try and perform as well as I could for you guys. I hope it's enjoyable. But yeah, if you are interested in purchasing the book and reading further ahead, I'm not going to release the whole book on YouTube. I'm going to probably do a few chapters, and that is it. But after that, again, if you want to purchase the book, it's available on Amazon, pretty much across all countries, Canada, US, UK, Germany, everywhere pretty much. And so, yeah, if you guys are interested in it, go check it out on Amazon, and it is available in Kindle and in paperback format. So with that being said, and without further ado, let's get into the book Soul Siege and today's version, the prologue. My lord, Nasi are on their way. Our scouts have reported nearly 1,000 men heading for our city. They are not alone, however. They look to be traveling with nearly 10,000 Wekmo. A man hurried into a large chamber within the castle walls. He was no ordinary man, he was a Deem. The Deem were mostly humanoid in appearance, but had a purple skin tone with flourishes of different colored patterns, as if tattooed. This one's skin was covered in silver and green markings. The Nasi would never fight alongside such an inferior race. They are too proud of such feats. Rock, if this is another attempt at humor, you have fallen short yet again. His voice had been gruff with age, his skin the same purple hue, but his markings had been much less prominent. Faded oranges and reds could be made out along his body. He was dressed in a long cloak, which draped down his back. It had been decorated in metallic fibers and small gemstones. His stature, even sitting, suggested he was quite tall. He sat stoically on his throne as he looked back at the young man. No, my lord. I am quite sure this is real. I trust the scout who came to me with this information. I'm afraid the news does not get any better. They are only a half-day's journey away, and will arrive by nightfall. Rock's voice trembled as he tried to express the severity of the situation. This particular tribe of Deem, though large enough to possess a kingdom, was only 10,000 strong in population. Only a quarter of that capable of fighting in a battle. I'm afraid Rock is telling the truth, my friend. I was on patrol outside the walls when I noticed large bellows of smoke headed this way. My fellow forest creatures have informed me that a large army of Nasi and Wekmo are torching the forest and making their way here. We must prepare for battle immediately. A feminine voice echoed in the king's head. It was sultry yet soothing at the same time. The king turned to see a large flying creature covered in scales. Its stature was massive, standing over 20 feet tall, with a wingspan twice that. The creature had long spikes running up and down its sides, each one coming to a sharp point. Its scales were the color of the night sky. It landed on a large balcony, seemingly designed for it. As it stepped closer, its claws scraped across the floor. It looked intently into the king's eyes, not with hostility, but instead with admiration. Ready the soldiers. We will not allow them into our city. We will meet them head-on where they least expect it. Perhaps the element of surprise will give us the edge we need to fend them off. In the meantime, have the women and children evacuated immediately. They will need to head to the northern forest to hide until the battle is over. We are Deem, and we will not be defeated on our own lands. The man then dismissed Rock and turned his attention to the large creature in the room. Once Rock had left, he focused on the large creature, transmitting his very thoughts to it as if they were having a perfectly normal conversation. Are you ready for another battle, my friend? Without hesitating, the creature stared back intently and communicated. We fight together, we live together, and we die together. We will vanquish those that wish to do harm to our people, our allies, and our lands. Till death we are one. The king repeated, till death we are one, at the same time before leaving and heading to the barracks to be outfitted. He arrived at the barracks and grabbed a long sword decorated with golden flourishes along the handle. Its blade gleamed with specks of black powder coating the edges, Once fitted in his gear, he joined his men and their animal companions outside the castle walls. Though the village was only 10,000 strong, each of the adults over the age of 16 had been bonded to a creature of the surrounding forests. It was part of a ritual which made the deem unique, called soul binding. The king roared as he raised his sword to nearly 5,000 allies, an equal mix of deem and their companions. The men all cheered back and raised their weapons high above their head. As they listened to the king shout out to them in defiance, "Today, history has been made. The Nasi and Wekmo have band together. Let's make sure no one remembers this event but us. We leave none alive, and we take no prisoners. Sacrifices may be made, but know you are laying your lives down not just for me, but for our families and the creatures we have sworn to protect. Today, let's make history our bitch." They marched through the gates and entered the dense forest surrounding the kingdom. After just a few hours, they spotted smoke clouds up ahead. The king ordered the archers to arm their bows, and the rest of the men to ready their weapons. Here was where they would make their stand. Here is where they would deny history. They waited until just up ahead, in a small clearing, they saw the Wekmo. These creatures had pale green skin and were covered in cloths rather than armor. The creatures let out a high-pitched cry, showing their razor-sharp and poorly groomed teeth before charging ahead. The archers released their first round of arrows and immediately nocked another. A cloud of projectiles rained down on the approaching Wekmo, as several fell to the ground, never to rise again. Some, however, were able to avoid the attack. They drew their swords and charged toward the king and his men. Without hesitating, the king's soldiers charged back in retaliation ahead of the king. The battle had commenced as nearly 3,000 allied forces made quick work of the hundreds of Wekmo that had managed to avoid the arrows. Within minutes, nearly 2,000 Wekmo had been defeated. Their bodies and organs littered the ground as pools of blood formed, staining the battlefield. A few seconds later, however, the remaining 8,000 Wekmo emerged and sprinted toward their enemies. Unlike the first wave, who simply wore cloth and had traditional Wekmo weapons, these were heavily armed and well armored. Each carried well-made longswords and were dressed in some of the finest leathers and chainmail. The archers fired several shots each, but this time only a fraction had struck critical blows. The two sides locked into battle, and the king sent in half of his archers to hand-to-hand combat, along with their animal companions. The remaining archers tried to limit the onslaught of attackers and slow their charge. The king, having seen enough of his men fall at the hands of their enemy, joined the battle head-on, fighting alongside his friends and allies. Several larger forest creatures were able to tear into the Wekmo and dismember them limb from limb, while some of the smaller creatures used their stealth and speed to distract the enemy long enough to land critical blows. As the number of Wekmo began to decrease to less than 2,000 remaining, that is when the Nasi joined the battle. These tan-skinned creatures looked very much like humans. Some adorned beards, while others had little facial hair at all. The only noticeable difference was their eyes. Unlike humans, their eyes were pitch black. It gave them a soulless appearance to anyone looking at them. Their skills with weapons, however, were incredible. Considered one of the most dangerous fighters on the planet, they were not to be underestimated. A constant need to improve their weapons and attacks drove them to continually develop new technologies to bring to a battle. They had largely been credited with creating the devastating catapults on this planet. Their entrance into the battle was soon felt as the Deem struggled to keep up with them, as well as the remaining Wekmo. For every Nasi they were able to take out, 3 of their own troops were killed. Seeing this, the king made one thought to his familiar, which had been eagerly awaiting his call. Now! Without hesitation, the large winged creature came into the field of battle and sunk its claws into the Nasi soldiers, easily tearing through the metal plate mail and heavy garments. The claws pierced vital organs, and victims were quickly left to bleed out on the battlefield. After taking out several of the Nasi, the large creature landed and let out a loud screech. A breath of ice immediately shattered through the armor of nearly 100 enemy soldiers, some Nasi and some Wekmo. Their bodies didn't even hit the ground before they shattered to pieces from the icy attack. The king had been trading blows with 2 Nasi, but was able to keep their long-range weapons at bay for the most part. Each swing from the Nasi was perfectly countered with the king's glowing sword. Neither side appeared to be making much headway until a third Nasi joined the battle. The king heard, "Behind you!" echo in his mind and turned to see a large poleaxe come striking down. The swing had severed his arm clean off. The king turned in anger as he used his remaining arm to swing his sword and cut the foe's head completely off. The body fell almost a full second later, collapsing to the ground. The other two assailants had tried to take advantage of their now distracted foe, but before they could get a swing in, a smaller creature that looked similar to the king's familiar appeared from the tree line. It let out a high-pitched screech, releasing a breath of fire and static. The attack melted the attackers in an inferno, while sparks of electricity leaped from their bodies. The king turned to the small creature with a surprise and communicated briefly through his train of thought. "Is this a friend of yours?" The large creature exhaled a deep breath of ice on another group of soldiers before thinking back a single word. "Son." The king's face grew to a smile as a tear left his eye. "He's beautiful." The king refocused and began fighting alongside the smaller creature, swearing to protect it from harm. As the two fought in sync, their attentions were drawn from the battle in a moment of complete devastation. Several loud bangs could be heard through the tree line as a series of large boulders pelted the king's familiar, causing her to collapse to the ground. The king ran over towards his friend to check if she was hurt badly. "Are you okay?" He did not hear a response at first until she lifted her head and thought back. "Just a..." The sound of thunder filled the battlefield as an explosion devastated the area in a 1-mile radius. The heat from the explosion vaporized the remaining soldiers from both sides of the battle, emanating from a center point where the king and his familiar stood. Silence filled the air as the dust began to settle. Minutes later, it cleared, and nothingness remained. All right, so that's the first part of the prologue. There is a second part to this. I actually did 2 parts. I was going to do 2 prologues when I wrote this book, but I decided to just do one and split into 2 parts. We have what's taking place on the planet, which is going to be known as Forte, which you'll find out later on in the book. And then we kind of go back to Earth and kind of see what's going on there. So here is the Earth section of the prologue. And yeah, I mean, this is where we are on Earth right now. The year is, well, actually, we'll get to the year. It'll mention it in the prologue. So without further ado, again, I apologize. I'm not a voice actor. So hopefully you guys are enjoying this despite my lack of talent. And here we go. During the same time back on Earth, a lottery was about to be held. Not just any lottery, however, a lottery which would grant an opportunity to 800 individuals. An opportunity to survive, something the remaining population has been struggling to do for years. Before we get too far ahead of ourselves, though, we should back up a bit and explain how we got here. In the year 2226, a nuclear war ended, decimating the Earth's population. The war ended not because there was a victor, but instead because there was no one left to fight. The population of nearly 10 billion people was eradicated down to just 100 million. Government leaders, armies, and most civilians were simply wiped off the face of the Earth. As time went by, several more people died due to long-term exposure to radiation. The average life expectancy was less than 45 years of age. By the 2240s, only half of that remained. It was at this time that corporations stepped up in relief efforts. The agricultural sector thrived as food became scarce. Survivors managed to find small pockets of radiation-free zones, or RFZs for short. These small pockets soon began constructing large buildings capable of housing several tenants, all jammed into small apartments. As these apartments started to become populated, rationing facilities began popping up nearby. These were the primary sources for food and clean water. In the year 2248, scientists estimated that the Earth would run out of resources in less than 100 years. It was evident that human life, or any life at all for that matter, would cease to exist on Earth. Just like the human population, the animal population was hit equally hard. Many animals that once roamed the Earth were nothing more than pages in a history book. This made sourcing food incredibly difficult. The few animals that did survive had changed drastically, not just in appearance, but in their genetic makeup. Disfigured and grotesque creatures roamed the Earth. However, they were inedible as their very cells swelled with radiation poisoning. The strangest part, however, was that their offspring possessed these same mutations. Finally, in the 2250s, scientists began working on a Plan B, codenamed Second Earth. The idea was to find a habitable planet where the human race would thrive and be able to repopulate. By now, the population was a mere 25 million, all crammed into these small RFZs. Scientists were able to stretch the limits of space travel by achieving speeds of 1/3 the speed of light. It took almost 20 years of tireless work. However, by 2273, they had achieved their goal. Still, problems remained. The closest suspected habitable planet was still 7 light years away, meaning it would take 21 years to reach even at their current milestones. The second problem was that the crafts would only hold 8 people each. While metal littered the Earth and radiation, which was the power source for these ships, was in abundance, the physics would not allow for larger ships without drastically decreasing the speed. The scientists were able to build 100 ships in total, allowing for 800 people to be sent out as pioneers to new planets. 400 men and 400 women would each be paired with the express purpose of reproduction. Each crew would build settlements on their new home planets and begin reproducing to establish a population. The planet deemed to have been the most successful would then be known as Second Earth. Our large vessel would be created to then allow an additional 10,000 people to travel there in a much larger ship. This ship would only achieve 1/10 the speed of light, though. All of this had been well planned, except one problem still remained evident. The travel time would be far too long for a person to survive. Even if they could survive it, they would most likely be unable to reproduce once they reached their destinations. In addition, due to the small sizes of the ships, they would only be capable of holding 6 months of rations for each individual. The idea being that people would be awoken 3 months prior to arrival and begin nourishing their bodies. Once they had arrived, they would have 3 months of rations to hold them over while they set up farms or forage for native foods. Each ship would contain seeds that had been vacuum sealed to then be planted once they arrived. All of this was merely a dream until the early 2280s when cryogenesis had finally been perfected. This allowed humans to be frozen at extreme temperatures while preserving their organs and reproductive systems. Using the DNA of the wood frog, a creature capable of producing glucose in its bloodstream to survive freezing temperatures, advancements were made to replicate the effect on humans. Trials were done with mostly positive success, and the formula was tweaked to better the chance of long-term success. The research showed that for an unknown reason, people with blood types of A and AB were most likely to experience limited side effects. People with O blood types had the most severe reactions to the serum, with under half surviving the 1-year experiment, and only a single subject surviving the 10-year experiment. With the formula tweaked and results appearing to be much more positive, the early stages of the mission were ready for more concrete planning. It started with determining a fair boarding process which would allocate the lucky 800 individuals who take on the important task of finding the most habitable planet. This pretty much brings you up to speed to where we are now. The year is 2299, and the lottery is about to be broadcast live to the remaining population, now just over 10 million people. Before we take you to the live broadcast, it is important to note how an individual will be selected, as not all individuals are given the same chances. The entries into the lottery are weighted by a person's age and career or training. For example, a medical professional would receive the most entries at 5, but would lose an entry for every decade over 30 they were, to a minimum of 1 entry. A 50-year-old doctor would therefore only get 3 entries into the lottery. The weighting was broken down as follows. Doctors, medical professionals, and agriculturalists were each given 5 entries, minus the penalty for their current age. Engineers, scientists, and police officers were given 4 entries, less their age. Welders, craftsmen, and woodworkers would be given 3 entries, less their age. Teachers, social workers, firefighters, and all individuals between the ages of 18 to 24 would be given 2 entries, less their age if applicable. Finally, the rest of the population, or those whose age was greater than the number of ballots they originally received, would be given a single entry. In addition to the lottery system, each group was divided by gender. Each ship was to contain 4 men and 4 women. They would be paired up with the express intent for reproduction. This was considered a failsafe in order to preserve the human race across the galaxy. As for those left on Earth after all 10,800 people had been sent off, they would be left to fend for themselves and hope that they would either die quickly or live out their full lives prior to the inevitable end. Many were encouraged to avoid having children if left on Earth, as putting a child through the eventual pain and misery of starvation, dehydration, suffocation, or radiation poisoning that would eventually follow was cruel to say the least. While humanity may still persevere yet, they are certainly not going to do so on Earth.